Welcome to the Pursuit Zone Adventure Travel Podcast. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview modern-day explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, get out of their comfort zones, and accomplish ambitious pursuits. This is episode 146 with Ben Page. I learned about Ben through the Banff Mountain Film Festival World Tour, and when I saw his adventure film, The Frozen Road, I knew I had to get him on the show. But before we get to that, if you want to give me some feedback about the show, you can reach me at paul@thepursuitzone.com, and you can also leave me a voice message through SpeakPipe if you go to speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. And now, let me introduce my guest. After university in 2014, and with 9,000 pounds in the bank, 22-year-old Ben Page flew to the bottom of South America to begin an around-the-world cycling adventure. As Ben reached Canada, he began planning a winter ride on a fat tire bike through the Yukon Territory, from Whitehorse to the village of Tuktoyaktuk on the Arctic Ocean. This 2,000-kilometer winter journey is documented in an award-winning film titled The Frozen Road, and you can learn more about it at Ben's website, anotherhorizon.org. After Ben thawed out, he continued cycling for another year and a half across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Ben Page, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thanks very much, Paul. It's great to be on it.
Ben, what did you study at university?
So I studied physical geography whilst I was at university, so probably quite an apt degree considering after university I then went off and cycled around the world. So I spent 3 years studying at Durham University up in northern England, and basically spent that time looking at pictures of mountains and glaciers and dreaming about where I was going to be going.
What were you thinking you were going to do for a job after you got out of university?
What was I going to do as a job? Well, I wasn't really sure. I'd always been a bike rider and a bike racer through my teenage years, and I kind of concocted this idea of cycling around the world when I was in my late teens. So whilst I was at university getting very bored in various lectures, all the time I was daydreaming and thinking about what I was going to do after university, and my mind quite quickly became set on the idea of cycling around the world. Now, obviously, I needed to have some money to be able to do that, so I saved up as much of the student loan as I could and worked various part-time jobs so that I was in a position that when I left university, I could then spend the next 3 years living on my bike and sleeping in a tent and going and seeing what the world's got to offer.
So you never ended up in a real job, quote unquote. You went straight from university to the cycling adventure.
Well, almost. So I finished university and then needed to save up some more money. So worked various part-time and full-time jobs as much as I could, kind of going into factories and working in bars and clothes shops, just trying to scrabble together as much as I could. So I had about 6 months after finishing university, but none of those were really like career jobs, so to speak.
When did your foray into the world of, like, is it amateur or professional cycling in Belgium? When did that happen?
I now look back on it as being very amateur at the time. I probably thought it was a bit better than it actually was. That was when I finished school. I didn't want to go to university, so I decided to leave England and move to Belgium and try my hand at becoming a professional road cyclist. So I spent a season racing over the Belgian Pavé and in some really hot competitions over there. But I realized quite quickly, really, that the lifestyle of a full-time athlete just wasn't for me. It was waking up in the morning, cycling all day, and then 4 hours later, you go to get back home, lie down and do nothing else. And I wanted to kind of use a bike as a means to travel and to see places rather than just a tool for exercise and for competitions.
Well, tell me about the bike that you put together for your adventure, and tell me about how you set it up, your kit and so forth.
Well, the bike that I set off with was a very different bike to the bike that I returned home with. Initially, I thought when I was going to set off that I would be riding mainly on roads, and kind of went for a conventional bike touring setup. So managed to get a frame from my local bike shop, a steel frame, and then put various bits and pieces from old mountain bikes and old bikes that we had kicking around at home onto that. So it was kind of this Frankenstein bike. Had some front panniers, some rear panniers, and kind of just a very classic, what you'd read online, the sort of setup that you'd go for. But this very quickly became the wrong setup for me, as I discovered that I found a lot more enjoyment cycling off-road, trying to find small tracks and trails that crisscrossed through the mountains. And in the end, the bike was kind of a hindrance to where I wanted to go. So very luckily, after 15 months of riding up through the Americas, I reached Canada, and there managed to get a bike sponsor, Fatback Bikes, who were based up in Alaska. And they gave me a new bike, a fat bike, and managed to get a full bike packing setup, which is like putting bags in the frame and on the handlebars and things. And that just suited me a lot better, allowed me to go to the places that I wanted to go to.
Did you start riding that bike at Whitehorse?
Yes, yeah, at Whitehorse, yeah. And then kept that for the rest of the journey.
Let me go back and ask you about, you got the frame from your local bike shop. Did you then build it up yourself?
I built it up with myself and then a friend who was a bike mechanic and also with a local bike shop. So kind of just meddled around. I didn't know that much about bike mechanics. So I thought it was quite important to learn a few bits and pieces by building the bike myself. But when I ran into trouble, I'd go down the hill from my house to the bike shop and ask for some help.
How important of a step to build this bike yourself was it, when you're out there and things break down?
Yeah, well, with that bike, a lot of things broke down, and I'm not sure whether that's because of my poor mechanicking skills or because the parts I was putting on were 10, 15 years old. Having a foundation of knowledge for how to fix bikes is really important, especially if you're in fairly remote places, because things will go wrong. But the beauty of a bike is that it is such a simple form of transport that if you sit and look at it for long enough, you'll solve the problem and figure out a way to get yourself moving. So more often than not, when things went wrong, I'd find a way to make it work with the very few tools that I had. And then I could cycle for a few days until I'd reach a bike shop somewhere where I could, use their workshop to fix it to a better standard.
You started this adventure with a group of friends. How important was that at the beginning?
Oh, I think that was immensely important, actually. A lot of people who have done this sort of journey before or have gone off and know they're going off for a few years speak of taking that first step or that first pedal stroke or even that first paddle stroke, and how nerve-wracking that is and how important that very first moment is of kind of breaking free from home and setting off on the journey. And when I've read these stories, people always say about the fears and the excitement. But really, I didn't have that many fears because I began down at the bottom of South America, riding through Patagonia with 3 other friends. And really, it just felt like a holiday for the first couple of months. And it was only when they then flew back home, back to England, and I continued on my own, that it kind of dawned on me that I had a long, long period of time stretching out ahead of me of solo riding and cycling back home, yeah.
You started off with 9,000 pounds approximately. How long did you think that would last you?
I kind of thought that would last me 3 years. I kind of knew that I only wanted to be away for about 3 years and kind of worked out that to go around the world would take roughly 3 years. I'd done bits of bike touring before, bits of backpacking, and knew that I could live pretty cheaply and knew that cycling was a cheap mode of transport. So, I mean, the only costs that you have are visas and food, because transport is covered by the bike and accommodation is covered by sleeping in a tent every night. So I knew that was going to be absolutely plenty, but I did set off and at the start of the trip was worrying quite a lot about making sure that money lasted. So I budgeted very hard and kind of scrimped a little bit on food, so I wasn't eating so much. And it was quite a worry for the first 6 months or so as I kind of figured out just how much I needed to, last for a month or 2 months or 3 months. So I tried to stick myself to a budget of somewhere between $3 and $5 a day, which is absolutely plenty. But then that left room for paying for flights between continents. A few times I had to replace a lens or bought a new camera halfway through. So there's some additional costs which had to be absorbed by that initial price as well.
And that money lasted the whole way?
Yeah, that lasted and came back with a little bit of it left. So yeah, pretty happy with that. But as I say, there were times when I was, very, very hungry because I didn't want to spend too much money on food, especially going through the States or in Canada, or even down in Argentina and Chile. Food was a little bit more expensive than I was anticipating. So I just had to really, really try and make sure I wasn't eating too much.
Did you end up losing weight over the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my weight fluctuated up and down quite a lot. One really memorable time was through the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. And as I said, Chile and Argentina, both those countries, the food was slightly more expensive than I was imagining it being, even just cooking for myself. And this was at the very start of the trip. So I was quite concerned about overspending. So I ended up losing a lot of weight, getting very skinny during that portion of the trip. And similarly, when I was up in the Canadian Arctic, I lost 12 kilos, which is, I'm not sure what that converts to into pounds and stones. But yeah, I lost a lot of weight going through the Canadian Arctic just because I wasn't taking enough calories on board and it was cold and quite an arduous portion of the trip. But I'm in full health now. Feeling good now.
Did you say you spent 15 months before you got to Whitehorse?
Yes, yeah. 15 months from Ushuaia up to Whitehorse, but a good chunk of that time I was living and working in Whistler in British Columbia. So I managed to get a Canadian work visa, and some friends were doing a ski season over there. So I thought this is a good time to kind of sit out a portion of the winter, do a little bit of work, and then really evaluate whether I wanted to continue. When I first set off, I half had in my mind that it was going to be a 3-year ride around the world. And then the other half of my mind said, well, you know what, get to Canada. And then if you're not enjoying it, you can call it off and fly back home. But obviously, I continued in the end.
What were you doing in Whistler?
I was a snow shoveler. So I was roaming the streets in the early morning, shoveling snow, working in an Arc'teryx clothing store, which was great because it meant that I could get a bunch of gear together that I'd need for riding up in the Arctic. I was doing furniture removals, and I volunteered on the Whistler Mountain to get a free ski pass. So working 4 jobs, which didn't really leave much time for anything else.
Which is good because I'd imagine it's kind of pricey up there.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And as I say, I was really in the stage of trying to put together this trip from Whitehorse up to Tuktoyaktuk, which required a lot of equipment and a lot of. I'd arrived in Whistler on my bicycle with everything I'd carried from the bottom of South America, which was great for maybe down to like -10 Celsius, but up in Tuktoyaktuk it was going to be hitting -40, and -40 is where Fahrenheit and Celsius meet. So I really needed to get new bits of equipment, and just as a place, it was quite pricey, and this was the first and only chance that I could save maybe a little bit of money as well. And my camera had unfortunately broken, so I had to get a new camera if I was hoping to film the ride.
So where are you staying there in Whistler? Do they provide housing for the workers?
No. So my living arrangement was mainly just moving between people's floors so I could save on rent. And I spent the last 3 weeks there living in a windowless shed just to save money on rent. But I had a nice big warm sleeping bag, so I was quite happy.
All right. So from when you started to Whistler, looking back on that time period, what do you remember most about that ride through, South America?
Well, South America really kind of seems like the halcyon days of the bike ride. I was wet behind the ears and wide-eyed, quite naive towards things. So wherever I was going just felt like such a big adventure, and everything was so exciting. There were tremendous ups and downs, which are kind of part and parcel of the territory of a long distance trip. But South America as a continent is just a fantastic place. I think a lot of that for me was that I really enjoy riding in the mountains, and for a whole continent you can follow the Andes from the tip to the top. So yeah, I do look back thinking they were just fantastic days, and I'd love to go back there. I'd love to go back there with a different, better bike so I can kind of tackle the harder remoter routes in those countries.
There's a page on your website where it shows there's 8 photographs. And when I first looked at these photographs, I thought, who are these 8 guys? Because I thought there's the 4 like the English guys, and then there's the 2 New Zealand guys.
Yeah.
So where do these other 2 guys come from? And then I realized, oh, wait a second. It's the same 4 guys, just that look different. It's the beginning of the trip and the end of the trip.
Oh, yes, yeah. So that was just us shaven and young-looking 21 and 22-year-olds, and then just a few months later, looking pretty grizzled and worn. And
yeah. But at first glance, it looks like 2 completely different people. It's just amazing.
Oh, right. That's good to hear. Yeah. I had some pretty terrible beards during my journey.
And another thing that I would encourage people to go to your website and watch the films that you put together, because they're really, really good, and you really do a great job of like choosing the music to go with them.
I must throw a little caveat in there that those films were just kind of edited in 2 days as I was riding through South America on a little laptop I'm carrying, so that I look back at them and I kind of cringe because they're fairly like amateur and quite raw, I suppose. But hopefully the Frozen Road is certainly a step up in quality from those.
Oh. Well, compared to a lot of things I see on YouTube, I mean, they're very well done.
Oh, well, that's great. Thanks very much. Thank you.
But I wanted to mention this because I don't know if anybody said this to you, but you definitely can notice in your face, like the experience that you're getting. You start out at the beginning and you're very, like you say, kind of wide-eyed, but then you can see the experience start to grow into your face as it goes along. It's interesting.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was actually looking at a photo of when I set off a couple of days ago, and then looking at kind of a photo of when I've arrived back home. I definitely have changed a lot as a person, and physically, I think I've changed a lot during that time. I look a lot older now, a little bit more wrinkled and grizzled, which isn't probably very good.
It was in Peru where a friend joined you, Alec. And what was that like to have, because now at this point you're pretty experienced, you got your cycling legs under you, and this sort of newbie, we'll call him, shows up to join you. How was that experience for you?
So Alec was a really good friend of mine from university, and he'd never really done any sort of bike trip or camping trip before, but he'd been looking at the photos I'd been sharing with some friends. And he was getting quite excited and asked me if he could join for a couple of months. So I said, sure thing, yeah, come along. And he joined me in central/northern Peru with the plan of joining me all the way to the top of Colombia. Now, I'd been at 4,000 or 5,000 meters up on the Andean Altiplano for the previous 2 or 3 months, riding some big hills, big climbing, getting very fit, getting very used to long days on the bike, getting very used to the routine of camping and cycling each day. So he rocked up very inexperienced and kind of very unaware of the toils and the difficulties of what are entailed. So it was actually really good to kind of use his experience as a lens through which to see my own progression from what I was like at the start, and just to share that experience with someone who hadn't really done anything like that before. He certainly struggled, but had a lot of successes as well. But sadly, near the end of his ride with me up in Ecuador, he went down with dengue fever. So he really kind of struggled right at the end with quite a serious illness. But he's well, and he hasn't been on any bike journey since. I think that's quite telling. But hopefully, I can persuade him in the coming year to join me again somewhere.
Is that a mosquito-borne illness?
Dengue fever, yeah. That's. I think he picked it up in either southern Ecuador or northern Peru.
How did you manage to not get it?
I have no idea. I think I was very, very lucky because we both got lots of mosquito bites, but somehow one of his mosquitoes was carrying the dengue virus or dengue disease or whatever the right term for it is. No, so I was quite lucky. I got the camera out and filmed him having a really rough time. I wasn't a very caring friend, unfortunately. Two young guys, you're going to kind of give each other a bit of stick, a bit of abuse.
You spent 6 days hitchhiking. Was that 6 days hitchhiking to get to Whitehorse?
Yes, yes. So that was from Whistler up to Whitehorse. So basically the entire length of BC.
And
I had to hitchhike in the end.
is there any interesting stories to tell from that time?
A lot of strange people.
Like how strange?
Oh, just kind of doomsdayist and apocalyptical prophecies being preached to me in the back seat. Some wonderful people as well. I met a lot of very, very hospitable, kind people, and some also quite scary people. And spent one night up in Fort St. John. I can't quite remember the name of the place. Up in northern BC. Spent a night in a homeless shelter up there as I was out on the road hitching, and it was getting dark and no one was giving me a lift. I'd been out there for 6 or 7 hours. Some people came up to me and they said, "Oh, you look like you need somewhere to stay tonight. So if you go down the road and turn right, there's a homeless shelter there, and they'll kindly take you in for the night." So I kind of felt a bit guilty about heading down there, but it was better than spending a cold night in my tent. So I walked on down, spent a night there.
What was that experience like?
It was very nice. Yeah, met some very interesting people in the shelter, and had a bed for the night. Just had to make do, and then next day back up onto the road, start hitching. Managed to get a ride then all the way to Whitehorse from there. And then the journey was about to begin. I never intended on having to hitch up through BC. I kind of wanted to obviously cycle, but I was trying to pull bits and pieces of kit together whilst I was in Whistler, and managed to pick up a bike sponsor. And because I didn't have a fixed address whilst I was in Whistler, I was living in sheds or on people's floors. Things kept on getting lost in the post. So I was initially supposed to be cycling and setting off at the start of February, but in the end, I didn't reach Whitehorse until the beginning of March. Winter was rapidly fading, or at least in my mind, winter was rapidly fading. So I had to get up there quickly, because the whole purpose of riding to Tuktoyaktuk on the Arctic Sea was to make sure the sea was frozen and cyclable.
Did I get that distance right in my introduction? I said it's 2,000 kilometers?
I think it was 2,000 kilometers, between 1,600 and 2,000. I never carried a bike computer, so I never actually measured distances. Yeah, so it's roughly about 1,000 miles, I think, which is between, that's 1,600 kilometers, so it's somewhere in that ballpark.
Your Fat Tire Bike sponsor, they're not the ones that are putting this kit all together for you. They're just providing a bike, and then you have to get the bags and everything else together yourself. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so they very kindly gave me a fat bike, which without that I really couldn't have done the ride through northern Canada. But then in addition to that, I had to get kind of warm clothes, and the tent that I was carrying was fine for up there, so that was good. And I managed to get my dad's old mountaineering sleeping bag, so I was sorted for a sleeping bag. But I needed to get some down jackets and some warm layers for hands and some bags for the bike, etc. Yeah.
So you start out cycling on the Dempster Highway up to Fort McPherson, where you can resupply. What was that part of the trip like?
For actually the very first part, I rode along from Whitehorse up to Dawson City. And so this is like the first half of the Yukon Territory. I rode a trail called the Quest Trail. And this is kind of a small dog sledding trail which crisscrosses through the mountains and the lakes and the Yukon River up there and bypasses the road. And luckily that trail was open, because 2 weeks before I was there, there'd been a big dog sledding race from Fairbanks in Alaska to Whitehorse. So on that trail, they had these little orange posts marking it, and it had been nicely groomed, and there hadn't been any fresh snow fallen since the race had gone through. So this was a really fun sort of roller coaster trail, passing through just some stunning places. And that took me up to Dawson City, and then from there, I then jumped on the Dempster Highway, which is a gravel road, and that carried me 500 miles or so up to Fort McPherson. And Fort McPherson then decided to leave the Dempster Highway, because I don't really enjoy cycling on roads, so it was still a road on the Dempster Highway, and someone had said that I could cycle on a river up there, the Peel River. So I took to the Peel River and then onwards up to Tuktoyaktuk and the Arctic Sea. So that was kind of the rough route that I followed.
At Dawson City, isn't that the place where you take that shot with the toe in it?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Did you do that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what it was called. But yeah, I think there's been a few people up there who've lost toes with all the cold weather.
Okay, so you start off on the Peel River, if I remember correctly from your film. I think it was supposed to take you a couple of days, and you had like that much food with you. But then what happens is it snows, so now you have to. And if anybody who's ever ridden a fat tire bike through fresh snow, it's quite a bit more challenging than if it's packed down. And so now you're wondering, are you going to make it? Are you going to run out of food? Tell me that part of the story.
Yeah, so Fort McPherson was up at around 67, 68 degrees latitude, so up above the Arctic Circle, and I've been riding for about 3 weeks to get there. And as I say, someone had said, oh, well, if you want to leave the Dempster Highway, which I did, then you could follow the Peel River, and about 200 kilometers later, you'll reach a small village called Aklavik, and then from there you can rejoin your original route and get to Tuktoyaktuk. So this sounded like a fantastic option. I'd never ridden on a frozen river before. It was going to be a really wild place, and I thought this is the purpose of, this is the reason why I'm doing this journey anyway, is to keep on pushing my boundaries. So I set off down this river and estimated it'd take 2 days. So took 2.5 days worth of food just to be sure. I made good progress on that first day, had a really positive time, camped up that night, and unfortunately there was a storm which was forecasted for the very end of the week, but it came 4 or 5 days early. And with that storm came so much wind and a little bit of snow, but the wind was just blowing all the ice crystals around and kind of completely covering this little track that I was following down the river. So I woke up that morning, and where I'd been cycling the previous day was just this blanket of fresh snow, and I just couldn't cycle through it. Up there, that far north, the snow doesn't really stick together. It just stays as these small ice crystals, so it's really, really soft. And then when you've got 2 meters of that above the frozen river, it was just impossible to be able to cycle. So I had to kind of figure out, I'm halfway down the river, do I turn around or do I continue? I was just over halfway and thought, well, I've got to continue pushing. And that's all I could do. I just had to ration the day and a half's worth of food I had left and push my bike as far and as fast as I could. And that took 3 days of pushing and kind of stuck in a lot of scary places in my mind. So that was quite a tough period of time for that part of the journey.
What kind of temperatures are you in?
Roughly minus 30, between minus 25 and minus 30 centigrade. So pretty cold. As I say, it's up above the Arctic Circle in winter, and still there's the remains of the storm. Wind was still blowing pretty strongly, and pushing. I don't know. It was quite worrying, because I suddenly realised then that if things do go wrong, if I make any mistakes or expose my hands or my face for a little too long, then it's going to be more serious than just getting a cold finger. So I had to be very, very aware of where I was going and what I was doing, just to try and make sure I was safe. Because obviously any small injury or any small difficulty out there can just be exacerbated by the conditions.
So what happened? How did you get out of that situation?
I pushed for just over 50 kilometers down the river. I'd estimated it was about 60 kilometers to get to the end of the river and this village of Aklavik. So I pushed for 3 days, 50 kilometers, and on that third day, quite late on in the third day, through the grey sort of low-hanging cloud and mist, there were these two lights which came bouncing and bobbing towards me. And they came closer and closer and closer, and I was kind of a little bit delirious, didn't really know what they were, really know what was going on, and then suddenly realised that, they must be hunters, and there must be 2 people from the village coming out hunting, so that means I'm pretty close to the village. And I kind of roughly knew I was maybe another half a day's push away from reaching safety. But these two hunters on skidoos were coming closer and closer and closer, and eventually they come up to me, and I start waving and beaming, saying hello, quite excited, because I realise at this point that everything's fine, because I know I'm only, a few hours, a morning's worth of pushing away from safety. But these two guys come up to me, and they say, "Oh, like, what are you doing out here?" I'm saying, I was coming down here on my bike. And they say, "Well, we're the search and rescue team. We've been dispatched from a Clavik. We've come to find you." Now, I had no idea that a search and rescue team had been sent. I hadn't told anybody about where I was going, which perhaps was a bit foolish. But news had spread up there that there's a silly British guy cycling down the river, and no one had seen me since the storm had passed through. So these two guys turn up and they say, "Well, you can either continue pushing, like you're not very far from the village, or you can throw your bike on the back of our skidoo and we'll give you a ride back." So I thought it was a bit trite to continue pushing, so I jumped on the back of the skidoo and rode the 20, 30 minutes to a Clavik, and was very, very grateful when I was in a much safer place.
After that, how was it smooth sailing to Tuktoyaktuk?
Yeah, so from a Clavik, I stayed the night there with the local police force, and then next day continued riding. It had about 3 days worth of cycling from a Clavik to Tuktoyaktuk, and this was down a frozen river again, onto the Mackenzie River, and then onto the big, wide, flat expanse of the Arctic Sea, which is a place where that really was the finish line of the Americas for me. So things were getting cold, things were wild, got bits and pieces of frostbite, and it was hard work, but it wasn't easy at all, but it certainly wasn't as dangerous or as quite as remote and scary as the days down the Peel River had been.
Well, congratulations on accomplishing that. I love
Thank
the
you.
film.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was kind of part and parcel of it. I'd been filming for the previous, ever since I set off from the bottom of South America, I decided to teach myself how to film. And I thought this part of the journey would be a really interesting documentary to make. So I put extra effort into filming, and then decided to edit that whilst I was cycling across Asia and Africa, and released it into a bunch of film festivals, and it's been doing really, really well. I've kind of been blown over just by the response I've been getting from people who've seen it, and how successful it's been as my first film in various mountain film festivals.
Hey, quick question. I want to go back and ask you about the tires that you have on your bike. How did you find the traction? Were they studded at all?
No. So it was very tough. When I set off from Whitehorse, I didn't quite know where I was going. So I'm really very bad at planning. So I set off from Whitehorse thinking I was going to be going north to Dawson City, and then across into Alaska, up to Prudhoe Bay up in northern Alaska. And that was going to be my finish line, because that's ever so slightly further north than Tuktoyaktuk. But when I reached Dawson City, I'd been contacting the US government to see if I could get a waiver to cross from Canada into the US and do it legally. But I'd heard nothing back and didn't want to illegally cross a border. So I had to very quickly decide, okay, instead I'll cycle up through Canada and reach northern Canada. The tires that I had were kind of trying to match, being really off-road and being on gravel roads as well. So I only had 4-inch tires, and they weren't studded, so things were pretty slippy when it got icy. But you fall over a few times and you get used to it, and then you get back up again and just keep on continuing.
Hey, if you don't mind, I'd like to just talk briefly about some of the some filmmaking parts, equipment and
Sure.
technique and whatnot. So you mentioned earlier that your camera had broken. So at this point, when you're in the Arctic, what camera are you using?
So in the Arctic, I was using a Panasonic GH4, which I bought secondhand whilst I was in Whistler, and that was one of the reasons why I spent so long working in Whistler, was to save up for a new camera, that would be able to handle, the fairly extreme weathers of the Arctic in winter. So when I was up filming the frozen road, so when I was up doing this part of the journey, I had 3 lenses. No, I had 2 lenses with me then, things that I'd been carrying with me since the start, and this new / second-hand camera, which I then continued using all the way till I got back home. In fact, it sat right next to me now on my desk.
What did you have for a microphone?
I just had a Rode shotgun mic. What's it called? Like a Rode
Video mic?
Pro. Yeah, Video Mic, that's one. Video Mic Pro, yeah. Again, that's something I'd been carrying since the very start, since I set off.
Did you have any issues in the cold with the equipment?
Various issues of just batteries dying, lenses freezing over. I had to strap any electronics, any batteries to my body just to keep them warm and keep them in my sleeping bag during the night. But things didn't break to the point where they couldn't just be thawed out and come back to life again. So, I mean, I lost a lot of time lapses and shots and things when the lenses would just freeze over and condensation would be a real problem, but nothing too detrimental, which was quite surprising, really. I mean, the camera that I'd chosen, this GH4, was supposedly weather sealed, and that's why I'd had to get a new camera, because this was going to be able to stand up to the abuse it was going to be given. But no, nothing too extreme in terms of breakages or problems.
How do you manage to keep yourself motivated in the cold weather to keep setting up all the shots?
Yeah, so that was probably one of the hardest things of the entire ride, was to, be pushing down a river, being very scared about what the outcome was going to be, and then also have that filmmaking brain which is saying, look, if you want to make a film of this, these are the moments that you need to capture. You need to go up, walk through the snow, set up the camera, walk back to the bike, walk across the frame with the bike, and then finish the shot. So how did I stay motivated? I don't really know, actually. It'd become a daily activity for the previous 15 months riding that I wanted to film the entire 3-year journey. I've now got about 8 terabytes of footage, which is waiting to be edited in 2018 into a feature film. But it'd become so normal just to be kind of filming as part and parcel of the ride and enjoying that process of documentation and doing something other than just cycling, that it didn't kind of take too much effort to be, leaving the bike, setting up the shop, filming, and kind of thinking with that part of the brain switched on.
What's the feature film going to be about?
It's going to be about the 3-year bike ride. So I filmed from start to finish almost every single day. Along the way, the filming gets better and better and better as I learn more and more and more. And I've just got this huge, enormous amount of footage, which I feel can't just sit there not being used. So I'm going to commit a very large chunk of time in 2018, I think, to try and edit that into a coherent story.
You going to do all this yourself, or are you going to do a Kickstarter and try to hire some help?
Very up in the air at the moment. I need help with it. It seems like such a tremendously large project to undertake. I mean, the Frozen Road is only 25 minutes long. That was all shot and edited and all done by myself. But I think I need some outside help with that. So currently running through the process of either kind of get some brands support for the film or whether I go down the Kickstarter route. But definitely I don't want it to be a solo editing project again, because that's probably more miserable than actually riding a bike for that length of time.
So you did the Jack London graphics in the video too?
Yeah. So that was, everything was I just learned it off YouTube. Those Jack London graphics were done on PowerPoint and then exported into Adobe Premiere Pro. And just kind of, I mean, there's a world of information online, and anything you need to know, you can learn.
Those looked really cool.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, thank you.
You got flown out to the 5 Point Adventure Film Festival. What was that like?
Oh, that was fantastic. So the 5 Point Film Festival was where I had the world premiere of the Frozen Road. And I kind of sent it into them on a bit of a whim. I'd made this film, edited it on a laptop, as I say, did it all myself. And I'm no filmmaker by trade, so I wasn't very hopeful, but thought, well, I'd finished it and the deadline for 5 Point was fast approaching. I thought, well, let's just submit it to that festival and see what happens. And then they came back and said that they absolutely loved it. They were going to show it in the festival, and would I like to join them in Carbondale in Colorado for the festival? So I said, absolutely, but I'm currently riding through Africa, and I've not got enough money to fly out there to join. But they said they'd cover the costs. So midway through Africa, I had this 3-week little sojourn over in the Rocky Mountains, showing this film at the festival and making lots of contacts, meeting lots of people, and yeah, it was a fantastic time, and the reception to the film was really, really far beyond anything I kind of imagined.
And you won the Spirit of Adventure Award.
Yes, yeah. So to be able to win that award after, the previous year, I think Alex Honnold had won the award for one of his films. So that was pretty bizarre to be to go there. Yeah, first film, first festival, and to get an award. It was really, really quite special.
What I find so kind of cool about the whole thing was you were doing that, you were edited and you made the whole thing while you were on the road on your adventure, and then you just sent it in, and all this happens. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, so I was carrying this old little MacBook with me, so I could edit photos and edit these little short videos I was making down in South America. The film has had no support, no sponsor, has no financial backing, so I couldn't give the footage to someone and say, "Can you edit this?" Because I had no money to give to them, so I had to do it myself. So it kind of sat on hard drives until I reached South Africa, and my sister at the time was living down in South Africa, so she kindly gave me some floor space on her living room floor to sleep on, and then edit the film over about 3.5 weeks there. So it was edited in a fairly short amount of time, and just very rapidly learning the different bits and pieces of editing. But it was good that the story has a very strong narrative arc to it, and that was just, the look of the actual journey was that it followed a very nice narrative arc. So the storytelling was quite an easy part of that.
Well, congratulations on winning that award, and also you won Best Director at the Bilbao Mendy Film Festival.
Yeah, so as I say, this past year it's been going through quite a few different film festivals and picking up quite a few like adventure and exploration awards. It even managed to pick up an award at Banff, that was really exciting. And then in Bilbao just 2 weeks ago, a film was awarded with the Best Director, which was something quite different because it's very much an adventure film, and to kind of be credited rather than just the adventure of it, to be credited as the storytelling aspect of it, which is what the Best Director really is. That was really quite special. So I loved that. That was a surprise.
Ben, looking back, do you have any advice that you would give to your younger self?
Keep on doing it. There was a few moments when I was at the start. I mean, those first 6-7 months riding through South America, I do kind of remember those as quite hard times with big ups and big downs, which slowly plateaued as time went on, and I got more and more used to it. Those big highs and lows, kind of peaks and troughs, just plateaued out. But at the start, when you're in those low moments, just to keep on knowing that the top of the mountain will be there, and there'll be a downhill pretty soon. Yeah, that's probably quite good advice that I'd give myself.
You've got a great quote in your film. It goes, "It's a rocky road to realizing your dreams, but there is no other road I'd rather be following."
Yeah.
Love that quote.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. And you got it right. You just need some big ice tusks on your face to be saying it. Bit of frostbite.
Your frostbite, did it heal up okay?
Yeah, the frostbite that it took. I'm not sure if it was frostbite or frost nip. It was more just the top layers of skin rather than the flesh. So a few weeks and the skin fell off and everything was fine. But yeah, back to that quote. I mean, it's pretty true. I think it's always a rocky road to realizing your dreams, to kind of do what you want to do, and that was certainly true for that portion of the ride, and continued for the next year and a half. Kind of the ups and the downs. But I arrived back home in late September 2017, and that was definitely very, very worth it. I can now look back on those 3 years riding, and you forget all the hard times, you forget all the scary times, all the difficult times, and you're left with just very, very positive, fond memories.
Ben, what's next for you?
So the next thing is to try and edit this larger film together, and I'd love to keep on going on more trips, more adventures, more wild journeys. So I've got various adventures up the sleeve for the coming years. Nothing quite as long as a 3-year bike ride, but certainly want to go and see what else is out there.
Hey, I don't think I asked you, but why 3 years? Why was that the time frame?
3 years. I mean, there's no real reason other than it felt like long enough to cycle around the world, but short enough not to kind of be away from home for too long and become too weird. I was very wary of I didn't want to come back and be this sort of strange guy who's been gone for 6 or 7 years, and not being able to fit back into life back home. So 3 years it just felt like the right length of time. Kind of worked out to be 6-7 months per continent.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more, and how can they watch your film, The Frozen Road?
So if anyone has any further questions, I've got a website called anotherhorizon.org, which I'm hoping to finally update with the full details of the full ride soon. They can email me at ben@benpagefilms.com, and The Frozen Road is going to be released in the end of 2017, so there'll be various links online. If you type into Google The Frozen Road or go into Vimeo, you should be able to watch that there.
Okay, Ben Page, thanks so much for coming on the show, and congratulations on all your accomplishments.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Recorded December 28th, 2017. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.